Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody. I want to say a very, very warm welcome to our panel. A warm welcome to the LCF founders that are in the audience live, and a welcome to LCF students who will be joining this session when this session is broadcast. So welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us for the first in our series of Graduate Futures Inside the Industry panel discussions, which we will be running throughout the year. I'm your chair today. My name is Professor Roni Brown. I'm head of London College of Fashion and Pro Vice-Chancellor at the University of the Arts, London. These discussions seek to share insights from industry and practitioners throughout the creative industries on starting and running a business, on the changing nature of roles across the fashion industry for graduates seeking employment, and this really tricky thing about how to navigate and develop resilience as a freelancer where students are thinking about self-employment. So we have an amazing and diverse panel of entrepreneurs today, entrepreneurs, employers, freelance professionals, a number of whom are fantastic LCF graduates. We're very proud of all of that. Our panel are here to share their personal experiences, first and foremost, really thinking about those early steps and stages of career management, which I think, many of our students and our graduates, really want to hear about. How do you navigate that space? How do you plan those early career steps? But before we get into our questions, by way of introduction, I'm going to ask each panelist to take 15 seconds, we're not going to be counting, but around about that, to introduce themselves to our audience before we kick off with some questions. So I'm going to come to Irene first of all to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Roni. Thanks so much for having me. Everyone, my name is Irene Marie Seelig, and I'm the co-founder and CEO at AnimXR. AnimXR is a virtual immersive e-commerce platform, and we recently launched in December 2020.
Thanks, Irene. Daki.
I have to unmute for a second there. Hi, everyone. My name is Demi Maroof. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Sabri Maroof. So I'm one half of a fashion accessories label that's working predominantly in handbags and jewelry. We create artifacts that are inspired by our Egyptian heritage, but are also very much about using emerging technologies and new technologies in storytelling. So it's really at the intersection of old and new.
Brilliant, thank you. And Comet.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm Comey. I'm the founder and director of Glow. We're a sustainable brand that makes accessories working with women in the UK and abroad to hand knit all the pieces. And we're about enabling and empowering women to use their existing skills to create an income and then create an interesting product that people can use on their bikes and outside, as everything is high vis.
Thank you. And Katie?
Hi everybody, thanks for having me. So my name's Katie Barron and I am the Director of Brand Engagement for Stylus, which is a trends, innovation and insights company. So effectively, I'm a futurist. I'm a strategist and a futurist, and I'm also an author and a journalist. And my job at Stylus covers retail and brand comms and pop culture and media. So I'm effectively looking at what's happening culturally, socially, politically, technologically, to kind of scope out where brands should be jumping into, where is lucrative, where is commercially viable, but also increasingly where is a socially positive space to move into. With trends forecasting, I always say the future obviously isn't written. So a lot of what we're doing is actually steering things into the future, not just predicting what's gonna happen indefinitely. So that's me.
Thank you. And Alfredo.
Oh, thanks, Roni. Thanks for having me. My name is Alfred. I'm the founder of Away to Mars. Away to Mars is a co-creation and crowdfunding platform. So we connect designers and creative minds from all over the globe to create fashion products, and we sell worldwide. And we also do collaborations with traditional fashion brands like Missoni, Harvey Nichols, the Woolmark Company, So basically allowing creative people from all the countries to co-create and express themselves.
That's great, thank you. You are such a brilliant panel. Thank you so much for representing such a broad range of practice. So we're going to kick off with some questions, and we've created these questions on the back of the things that students, feel that they most want to get some insight into. So, play it from the heart, as it were, draw it from your own experiences. That would be fantastic. What's been really interesting is that we've seen student engagement in our enterprise program more than doubling in recent years, and seeing students really keen on the uptake of enterprise skills and competencies connected to business startup activity. So kind of a question throwing out to sort of any of you really is, what is it that you wish you had known about or learned about before setting up your own business or before getting into the workplace?
I could start. The importance of cash flow management. Fashion is really high with its cash burn rate. The importance of investment, importance of really having a target to get to a certain financial area where you break even, and managing costs. It's really your typical thing with business, but I mean, more than any other industry, you really have to manage cash flow, I think, with regards to that. So that was one thing I wish I knew. There was quite a few incidents that were kind of like, oh, I wish I would have just like planned ahead, managed things, because there's so many overlapping elements with incomings and outgoings within our industry. So I also wish I would have known that the pandemic was coming. So I would have been, have a head start a little bit to, get us prepared for this kind of like new stage that we're entering, really. But we're all in it together.
Oh no! So you didn't have a crystal ball. That's just
no. Darn it.
Anyone else? What are the things that you wish you'd known? Comment.
I think, on that, I think having a mentor, if I'd known the value of mentors before I started, that would have been just so helpful, because actually, if you're creative, often you don't have the skills to be financially literate necessarily, or the business know-how and all the gaps in the broad sort of thing of making a business sort of actually sustainable. You can't expect yourself to have all the skills. So having like good mentors in the gaps, like financial literacy or budgeting or marketing, whatever, that would have been a bit of a game changer if I'd had those in place and had people to ask really good information and clear sort of tools to help me negotiate all the sort of unknowns.
So I guess that's the point, that you don't know when you're going to need to know something. So having mentoring around you is a way of kind of getting inputs just at the point when you most realize that you need to know something.
I guess it's slightly different for me, because unlike some of the other guys, I'm not an entrepreneur myself, so I didn't necessarily have the kind of issues of cash flow, but I was going to agree with Comey in another respect, from a kind of being inside a business perspective, because I think stylists, we've almost had to work like a startup for the last 10 years in a way, because with the business that we work in, obviously there's so much flexibility and so much change when you're dealing with brand culture, pop culture, media. So in the similar kind of way, actually, I've almost had to reach out to kind of de facto, sort of, by proxy, sort of mentors in my own way, because I've had to find different people inside those industries to help me steer myself through where I was going. I think if you'd have worked in trends forecasting in say, the retail sector, sort of 15 years ago, you'd have probably been quite clear on what your boundaries were, the type of things you'd be reporting on, what you needed to know about. So in a very similar way, I kind of just wanted to reaffirm that idea of mentors, that I actually have a number of people, some people that, aren't writers, some people that really don't even care about trends forecasting, but people where I'll go and sit, for instance, in a tech dungeon, or I will go and spend time with consumer psychologists that are, that are only a little bit interested in what I do. And I think just to affirm that sense of having people around you that have very specific fields of expertise that you can use as sounding boards, that I feel is something that's kind of kept me afloat at times when I've been looking at industries that are changing so fast. it's almost hard to keep a grasp on what you're doing. So I guess for me, I'm a little bit tangential, but that idea of mentors and having people that are almost your rods in the ground to support you is so useful. You know, never thinking that you know everything, even when you're supposed to be the expert in something. You don't have to be, if you know what I mean.
And that is amazing, because I always think, you know, I mean, we've got something like 350 founders in the LCF Founders Club. So that in and of itself is a phenomenal potential mentoring pool. And I think, you know, the fact that you're more recent in your experiences often means that your understanding is very current. And, you know, so yeah, mentors play different kinds of roles at different stages in your career. It's not just at the beginning, but it can be at various points that you hit the next step. So the other thing that's kind of on our minds at the moment, and again, be useful to get your thoughts, is, you know, that sense that the pandemic has really accelerated change, maybe change that was kind of coming along anyway. And that we're facing some acceleration of change within the fashion industry, kind of in a good way. And I just wanted to get your thoughts really on those areas that you feel that you've seen changing or that may change as a consequence of the pandemic. This is us getting the best out of this dreadful set of circumstances that we possibly can. Yeah, Irene, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, it's on everyone's mind, thinking about virtual and thinking about, you know, how do you digitize your supply chain? And so, of course, this is, you know, how do you sell a product? So this is something that's been obviously on a lot of people's minds. And yeah, there's been a huge shift in this. Prior to starting my startup, I was working for Swarovski, and then prior to that, working at Stella McCartney. And it's just been really interesting to see that dynamic shift, talking to past colleagues and seeing, you know, how they're now looking at all these, you know, different aspects of, you know, augmented reality or virtual reality, or how to digitize the supply chain, when before those concepts were, you know, 10 years, you know, down the road for them. So it's been really interesting to see that shift, and now, you know, being in that space of virtual reality, and how that uptake has been very, well received.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I mean, in my job, obviously, I get very specific insights into what clients are kind of desperate to know about. And obviously, the shift into kind of hyper digitalization is obviously the big one. But it's interesting for us because it's very much connected for fashion, how that is related to how we communicate with one another, what stories we're trying to tell, and of course a massive, you know, eco-ethical issue as well. I mean, you know, for our clients, it's interesting because I can see even what keywords are changing, what people are looking for. And about a year ago, maybe sort of year and a half ago, the biggest kind of search term on Stylist was probably luxury, actually. All of a sudden, the pandemic hit, and actually the preoccupation with people and planet has shifted massively. So actually sustainability, inclusivity, diversity, everything to do with a kind of eco-ethical perspective on life has been massive. And of course, this is very tied into talking about the digital acceleration as well, because fundamentally, you know, if I was to say what's the one thing that has really changed with the pandemic, that affects everybody listening to this today, I imagine, it's the idea of what is consumption, what does it mean to be a consumer, and therefore also what does it mean to be a brand? You know, what are you selling, what do you really need to sell? And so that's the kind of key thing to understand, I think, is that we're in a very, very different landscape of whether we're consuming things, real things, digital things, experiences. You know, what do people actually want in those terms, and what should we be selling? You know, if you're a brand and you're starting now, what do people actually need? You know, what are the narratives and the things and the services that people actually need? So I imagine, you know, if I was going back into the fashion industry now as a student, you know, I might be thinking about the services as much as I'm thinking about the things as well, you know, and the experiences around those things too.
Yeah, I think to jump on that, I do agree with like ethical and sustainability, excuse me, those are the real key changes. And on top of that, I think people are really interested in the social sides of it. And across the board, like I read the WGSN report earlier on this year and was saying that brands and businesses sort of in any sort of sector need to start baking social imagery change into their core values. And obviously we're like a social enterprise ourselves, and that's been our core from the get-go. But I think that a whole environment is shifting to being far more compassionate, I think, and having a bit more time. You know, the time this whole pandemic has given us has sort of helped, I think, everyone become far more aware of the implications of their purchases. And yeah, sort of hopefully changing the way we see sustainability is just being about the planet, but also understanding it's intrinsically linked to people, and brown and minority people in particular, and understanding sort of the relationship and the tension between all of our consumption. I think that's shifting as well.
I think it's going to spur some really interesting collaborative models, which is interesting to think about if you're starting a business now as well. So for instance, because to get to that place realistically, you know, this idea of kind of open sourcing, whether it's to do with a new retail model, whether it's to do with supply chain management, whether it's to do with creation, collaborative energy, and you know, which had sounded a bit woolly before, but I think those sort of collaborative skills are going to be super key. I mean, you even see it in things in retail, for instance, in things like digital wardrobing concepts, where you had a concept that was originally all about being able to have visibility on what you're wearing so you don't keep buying the same thing. And all of a sudden you'll see services going into those things. So all of a sudden you have, you know, services, whether it's rental or donation or repair or being able to share peer-to-peer services, all coming into this one technological platform that was originally designed for one thing that will then be able to facilitate other things. And I think that's really critical because, you know, I totally agree with Comet that when the pandemic started, you know, talking to some consumer psychologists, there was a lot of chat about actually, will this make us more selfish because everybody becomes more sort of survival oriented? Or will it actually mean that that kind of kindness element of the contagion, which is supposed to be one of the kind of big four elements of the contagion, will that continue through? And I think actually what we're seeing, thankfully, is that sort of sense of empathy and kindness is winning out, whether it's to do with what you're buying, whether it's to do with your locality, your own community. So, but I think that the opportunity is to kind of act on that now, because the truth is that, you know, with the best will in the world, you don't really know how long that lasts for. And we hope that this continues. So actually the positive things we can take out of this pandemic is that sense of community, collaboration, social progression, you know, ethical behaviors. And so if people are kind of looking at starting businesses now, to be able to kind of ride that wave and jump on it and solidify that sentiment, I think is really, really important.
That's really helpful. And I suppose we'll come on to it later on in some of our questions, but that sense that, you know, of the hope that we see deeper structural changes to value systems taking place as a consequence of the pandemic seems to be quite, you know, a clear pitch that you're making, and that has commercial opportunities as well as those important ones around how we connect with each other and stay supportive as communities. So I'm going to kick off with some questions that have been kind of designed around your particular experiences and the things that you're involved with. And actually, Katie, we're kicking off with you. And the question is, how do you imagine the nature of work, or how do you imagine the nature of work might change as a consequence of moving out of the pandemic? So in a way, you've sort of kicked us off on some of that, but maybe you'd like to expand upon some of those points a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I guess I'm kind of recapping to say that I think it's interesting because actually I think there's both a real need, certainly in the business that I work for, a need and a value to have both a permanent team and a satellite group of freelancers as well, because, you know, I think in any business, it's really important to have that kind of group of people that you work with very regularly that kind of support you, but also push you. You know, I work in a business where it's really, really important to have people that aren't really yes people with you, people that constantly test you, people that constantly come from a different perspective from you. I think when you work in future scoping, the most important thing you can do is A, be quite non-judgmental, and B, be able to step outside your own experience, which can be really difficult to do at times, especially when you look at the sort of type of people that work in those businesses sometimes. I mean, for instance, I'm working on a big project about the future of sex at the moment. That's really, really interesting. Well, kind of, because we're looking at kind of key sexual demographics and how the pandemic has changed that. And first of all, we were talking about techno-sexuality and digi-sexuality, and there were a few raised eyebrows, and people were like, we're not going to write about sex robots. And we were like, no, it's not about that. It's actually about how intimacy has changed as a result of the pandemic. So it's really important to have a kind of tier of people around you that will really push you and you can really wrestle with. But also, obviously, I guess, as I mentioned, to recap on that idea of, I potentially have to jump into spaces where I know a little bit about, and actually I'm going down a rabbit hole, whether it's kind of the future of automotive design and how that is reflected in brand culture and retail, to supermarkets, to fashion, to very specific elements of fashion. And so therefore, actually, for me to have a kind of sounding board of people around me and kind of different people I can switch in all the time to really change it up is really important. And I think, it's adding a different dimension, and it's also the kind of fresh eye and the fresh blood. And I think, so for me, I don't know if that answers the question really, but I think it's that kind of combination of having your kind of core group, but also really, really pushing yourself to go outside your experiences, to have satellite networks of contributors, whatever they might be. That might be a designer, it might be it might be an academic, it might be a consumer psychologist, it might be a creative of some sort, it might be a technologist, whoever they may be, whichever field you're working in here. I know all of us on this panel will have different versions of that, to just kind of keep pushing you as well. So yeah, it's I'm in a job that sort of never really stops. Well, we all are, but I feel like I have to be on top of a lot of things a lot. So I have to pull on those people that are my extra kind of spies, as it were.
And do you think there are different ways of working that we've learned? I mean, almost like, the way that we're conducting this panel session this afternoon, that helps to create those collaborations and those partnerships. I mean, are you seeing that shift away from sort of conventional ways of collaborating through to
so yeah, I mean, we would never really use kind of conventional focus groups, for instance, because I think they don't really work that well. For one thing, people behave very differently in focus groups in terms of what they're actually doing. So I think for us, it's a kind of mix of quantitative data, qualitative data, looking at data from lots of different sets and being able to understand how to kind of merge that data and layer up what's happening in lots of different places to understand what's really happening. So I think, for me, I mean, data and technology actually is that is a big shift in terms of how we really learn and how we enable ourselves to be surprised. So actually, I think, I would like to work with data scientists more closely, actually. And it's funny with what I do, because obviously it's actually very easy to get statistics on all manner of things, but it's very easy to get statistics on what people are doing now. To project into the future is a much, much different space. So it's about kind of, so we're lucky in a way that we're just at the sort of tip of the iceberg of working out how to use with technology and science and data and all these things to help make better decisions, which you wrap creativity into and around. That's the thing. I'm not sort of saying this is about all of a sudden we have data and we ignore our intuition and we ignore our kind of, ability to join the dots in a way that, in a human way that's very, very important. But I think some of these tools are going to be increasingly important moving forward. And so that kind of combination of the human and the data and the intuitive and the creative and the kind of wildly visionary creativity is going to forge some really exciting new bonds moving forward.
Well, that's a brilliantly neat segue into the next question for Daki, which is the way those things resonate between the future is digital, and how we work with artisans and with skilled craftspeople and with the kinds of skills and knowledge that comes from all kinds of different cultural settings around the world. So, how do those two things work in harmony? Can they?
I'm not sure yet. I mean, this is something that we really concern ourselves with. And I'm not sure we have the answer yet, because I think we're still at this crossroads or this inflection point where things are changing, and none of us, we all have an idea of how things could be and where this could be going and what we could potentially do, but I'm not sure that technology is there yet, and I'm not sure that we ourselves know how to craft, make the best use of it. But I think there's different components to it. I think we should, as a general rule, work on making a hybrid between this digital and the physical world. On different levels. There's a communication component. I think we have to find ways of crafting these new digital experiences using AR and VR and even just normal media, things from just podcasts to some kind of docu-series, everything that would kind of go in and follow the process of making, so I feel like we've lost our connection to how are these luxury products made, and I suppose that used to be part of historically, that it feels like it just came out of nowhere. It's so special, it's so perfect. But I feel that now people are more interested in seeing, how did that come to be and who are the people behind that, and what's the bigger story here, and what does this product stand for? What do you guys stand for? So we should absolutely embrace technology in communicating, how something is made and why, but also who are the people behind it. And there's this also other component of, product development. We have to figure out ways to marry, artisanal skill and craft with all these new emerging technologies. And I think there's a good way to bring these two together. We're still dabbling on it. I mean, we're always spending on R&D and really trying to introduce new concepts to these craftsmen that might have never heard of, different things, but also introducing, it works both ways in a way. It's like a feedback loop. And there's also the social component. How can we, use this digital world where there's such a huge audience? How can we ensure that this hyper global world that's opening up to each other, how can we in this world improve the livelihoods of these artisans and these kind of like very old, centuries old techniques that are in very specific locales that are not really open or connected digitally? How can we bridge this gap so that they benefit somehow? And so that we could create it to be part of our business model, to allow these people's livelihoods to improve, because, there has to be this kind of like integrated approach, communications, product development, and the social component. And we're still trying to figure it out. I mean, I suppose you gave me a question and I came back to you with 10 more questions.
Well, I think you have in a way started to circle around that connection between authenticity, and how important, and that's a driver, really important driver, that piece around authenticity, that piece around, technology, and that piece around ethics, and getting those things into the right place inside a business model, which sounds like an incredibly complicated thing to do. And
it isn't. I think it's a lot simpler than it is, but it's just, and I think that's the way things, are meant to be. In a way, this transition that we're all going through with, morals and values and authenticity and technology, which has opened up everything. And now, I mean, with transparency, why should we be hiding behind things? And why should we always present things that are just highly polished and kind of like perfect? I think our audience are more and more into wanting to see the gritty part of things, and I think we should use technology and the digital world to facilitate bringing them in new and exciting ways.
Alfreda, can we come to you and just think a bit more about the spaces around virtual fashion and gamification, and get your sense of how that part of the industry is changing and developing and accelerating? You know, what kind of opportunity does this present for the industry?
So for us, it was a very interesting time. Like the pandemic, of course, affected the business in different ways. But as Katie was saying before, all this sense of community and collective work, then was just like a boom for us. And then suddenly we got all these amazing people from all over the globe trying to find ways of collaborating and expressing themselves while they are locked in at home. So I think this could potentially be a form of how we work in the future in the creative industries, working from like with a very multitasking broad community group. And going back to your question on the technology, and I think we are now on a very interesting time because we have a lot of information, we have a lot of available data that we haven't had for a while, like we never had before. So we have access to all this huge amount of creative information sitting there on the web, and we also have we are achieving now amazing processing power that we didn't have before. So if we get those two things with the processing power and data, we can achieve amazing creative things, like as what was Katie saying before. I would love to work with a data scientist. Yes, we had to hire a data scientist now because we are in this crossroads now that we move towards technology and understanding data, understanding all this creative information and how to use this to the benefit of the creative industry and on product development, or we're just gonna get run after. So I think it's a very for us it's a very exciting time. So like we are developing now with UAL a new tool that's using artificial intelligence as a co-creator, so to work side by side with a creative mind. So we're not trying to make a substitute, but we're trying to improve the work of a creative with the creatives. With that, with a better data analysis, with a better product decision, choosing a more sustainable way of cutting the patterns. So all these kind of things that we have available already, but it needs some understanding of data. So I think. And then going back to your first question in the span of how we what I wish I had learned before starting my own company was that the importance of data and the importance of observing all these small signals that together can make a different completely different decision making. So yeah, I think that's what we are trying to do now.
And just picking up on some of the points earlier, so therefore is this pushing the space around new and innovative types of experience as opposed to simulating traditional ways of doing things in the industry? Is that what you're seeing? Is that where the opportunities are sitting?
Sorry, you cut a little bit for me.
Yeah, no, I was just picking up on one of the points that was made earlier about this being about stimulating new kinds of experiences rather than just simulating in a virtual space traditional ways of doing things. And I think that's what you were alluding to. So this is actually about innovation.
Yeah, 100%. I think what we're trying to do is, so I think we shift in circles from a very traditional fashion houses that are all closed doors, no one knew what was happening, and then suddenly with the internet and Instagram, blah, 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 everyone had access to the catwalks and everything was happening. And what I think what the next stage is to get people to understand the creative process and get the public and normal us to access what people are were creating before they even conceived. So, and then when you do that, you avoid a lot of things. You avoid a huge amount of unnecessary inventory. You avoid being, I don't know, doing wrong things or being racist when you're creating a product because you haven't had any cultural feedback or any other person's feedback. So I think when you involve the crowd and the community in the creative process, that is the key, and that's what I think what the industry should move for now. Yeah. So I think yes, we are moving to our trying to make this. We're not being a digital. I don't think the future is digital, but I think the experience in the future will be digital. Yes.
I was just going to say, Roni, to add to that, I think to your question about inventing new experiences, I think it's a really good point, because I think there is that sense that, you know, I often have to look at how behaviors will actually change. And of course, we don't necessarily just stay that, you know, have these tools to hand and all of a sudden we're the same people, but using these tools. When we have new places to play in or, you know, live in, socialize in, we become slightly different ourselves. Obviously, there are some things that humans are hardwired to do. So it's a little bit like, I think Irene will probably be able to talk to this even, you know, better than I can actually. But you know, there was a project that Irene had done with the Fashion Innovation Agency, for instance, and it was really interesting because it really, for me, triggered a lot of questions about when you create this really compelling online space for a brand or a festival or whoever it may be. You have to really think about how you behave and how people will kind of inhabit those spaces. And all of a sudden you have, you know, there are things that you can kind of replicate that you would do in real life. You know, you can walk in through a gateway, you can, but how do you communicate with other people in that space? How do you bring in commentary? Is there a way you can actually jump in and inhabit vicariously the perspective of somebody else in that space? Of course, that's something you can't do in real life. So all of a sudden, these new experiences, these new innovations actually make us think about the world from a kind of, you know, philosophical way, potentially as well, in a very different way. And I think that's really exciting. You know, they make these things possible that wouldn't have been possible. I mean, you know, going back to what Daki was talking about as well, you know, when you're thinking about being able to see something being made and being able to take in the kind of veneer of things. I think that's interesting also because some of these technologies, these are actually going to kind of, they mix up chronology in a way. They allow you to jump into a time you couldn't have experienced yourself. They imagine you to jump into the perspective of someone you wouldn't have been aware of. Or, you know, there's been lots of instances where AR and XR has been used to really elicit empathy. You know, so there can be really very real world empathy. And also you have the fantastical side of things as well. So actually it will take people to places where you can imagine things, you know, almost being able to kind of push your brain into a space where you jettison the, you know, real world and conventional narratives and think that you're very aware of. So I think there is a sense also kind of that awareness of the excitingness of these things will make us think about our lives and ourselves in a very different way. And obviously we have a choice about the way we steer that in a positive or negative way. But I think it's, sorry, I just wanted to jump in because I think it's an interesting space to talk about.
We'll come back to some of those points, but just on that very last moment and coming to comment about some of the things that you were saying earlier about fashion being an agent for positive change. I mean, this is something that we're talking a lot about at LCF, but how, from your perspective, how do we put that into action? What kinds of organizations, social enterprises, etc., are successful in that space? What does it look like from your point of view?
Yeah, I think, man, I could go on for ages answering that question. There are so many different elements that I think need to be shifted and like sort of fresh thinking needs to be applied to. I think one of the things we do, like what personally, I always say it's people over profits, and it sounds really basic and everyone will sort of say that, but actually the crux of it, really we have to start thinking differently, and kind of like Katie was saying, just putting ourselves into the kind of into the feet of other people, and doing like even just basic stuff like bias training would help us create atmospheres and environments where people who are different would feel comfortable. Because actually the reality of it is like the typical like historical fashion environment is quite toxic for a Black woman. So if I don't feel comfortable in that environment, I won't thrive, I won't succeed, I won't create impact, and the status quo will keep rolling on, you know. So actually in order to create change, you need different eyes, you need different people in the spaces who have agency and have capacity to voice and to change and shift where sort of the things are going. And if we aren't comfortable in that space and we can't create change, and you can't expect the status quo to change with the same sort of vision, as it were. So I think one of the keys to creating change is changing the people who are actually part of making that change. That's one of the vital things that needs to happen. And I think, like we're saying, compassion and empathy, this needs to be not just something we think of at the end, oh, we've got this collection and oh, here's all the dead stock, or oh, let's do something compassionate, let's go and give it to some poor people. Like, no, that will no longer cut it. Like, to create positive impact from the beginning, you need to be really thinking about your whole project and really interrogating it and being, I think, it's going to say, like, if I say sacrificial, that might sound quite like a big deal, but actually it is to an extent sacrificial. But in reality, the world is just like, it's entirely inequitable. So what it really is people just letting go and saying, well, actually, we've had too much, and the only way to make this equitable is for us to like sacrifice. But reality is to create change, we have to just really shift the ball game entirely. And so, yeah, I think having like every company, every startup, everyone who's serious about not even making an impact, but like being part of the economy to sort of in the future, they really need to think from the beginning. What changes do we want to make? What are we passionate about? And how do we do that? And what cutbacks, what do we not do in order to make sure we can create the change first, versus going, oh no, we've come to the end of the budget and we can't make that change, maybe next season. Just really sort of making it a massive pivotal part of the company's ethos and their vision, like baking it in from the get-go.
And I made the classic error of suggesting that social enterprises it's in the social enterprise space that you get positive change and new ideas around values and how to enact them. But actually what you're saying is it's across the industry wide. It has to be at the vision point. It has to be at the point about discussing purpose, and it has to be across the full industry in all of its different dimensions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people need to realize you can't make all the change. Sometimes I think people go, oh my goodness, well actually we can't do everything we want to do, so we won't do anything. And actually that doesn't work. If every industry said we are going to do this small thing from the beginning, not as an afterthought, but from the beginning, we're going to make sure, whatever it's passionate about is definitely part of our sort of whole vision, then every little company will be doing their thing. And that's all it takes. It's not about one company. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I've got to be sustainable and ethical and this and no that and blah, 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 blah. And then I go, oh my goodness, like suddenly it's all like a massive impossible task and it's not really viable. But I think we just have to decide what it is, and everyone takes some responsibility for ensuring that is really part of the nature of the company,
And it sounds like, again, you're making points about authentic leadership, and everyone that's coming through our education systems need to be thinking about, their particular style and approach to leading themselves, their own organization, and to others, which is my neat segue into my question for Irene, which is around, I suppose, what you've taken from education and what you have or you haven't put into practice. I mean, what have been the really important things that have helped you, take all the next steps most positively, and particularly around the innovation space?
Yeah, so great question. And I would just say, my time at the London College of Fashion really focused on just utilizing the networks, the mentorship, and just, everything that I was passionate about or had an interest in, I used it as a, exploratory playground, if you will, and just had, such a great time exploring all these different topics. I was looking at alternatives to leather made from mushroom for my thesis, and that was for the Caring Award. And for my thesis, I was looking at experiential e-commerce. I was also working with Halishan, a creative agency based in London, looking at how can you take data and visualize that data with the Caring Group and looking at, their environmental profit and loss account and how can you use technology to really describe and understand the supply chain and the people behind the supply chain and, how products are really made and where those materials coming from. So, yeah, I would say, great advice is just utilize your time at the moment while you're in university to explore every possible aspect of, what you're passionate about and find those mentors. There's such, amazing people at the university that want to help and ways in which you can collaborate. And just to echo everything that everyone was saying on the panel today too about, collaboration and how people are more willing, we have more time. And also it's great to see that this pandemic has really brought people together and wanted to help. So I already experienced that while at the university, and I think, it definitely probably there's a lot more of that going around as well. And then I would just say, I brought a lot of what, I was studying into practice. So, I worked at Stella McCartney and I was looking at their marketing and translating what they were talking about in sustainability and really, bringing that to the forefront on, how that's being communicated on all their channels to be, synchronistic of, how they're communicating about ethical fashion or sustainable fashion from environmental or ethical side. And then working at Swarovski, I was looking at different material innovations and worked for the innovation department and led a team of experts, engineers to designers, marketing, sales, to push new material innovations and also look at their supply chain and kind of see, where there are some gaps in terms of, trying to get, zero waste manufacturing down for them from like a packaging side or whether it be materials side in the production process. So it was, a great tool to, utilize your time while you're in university to kind of explore and then take those things into reality. And then just echoing also what Katie was saying and, how interesting it is that, there are new spaces too. So what I'm doing currently is going back to actually my thesis from 2016 is looking at experiential e-commerce and how you can take, a lot of these brands have had these, troubles on how do they communicate sustainability. And also what Comet was saying is, to really focus on, one key area and then how do you communicate that out authentically. And so we're, using extended reality as a tool set for brands to really be able to showcase, what they're doing from a supply chain perspective or, what they're doing, from an ethical or even heritage. Sometimes a lot of brands come to us and how do I communicate my heritage? And, sometimes that can get lost, if the brand has been around for, X amount of years, but to just give that inside view of a brand, I think it's been really exciting to kind of see that space grow and brands to be open to that as well, because kind of what Daki was saying as well of, how something has changed with this industry is being more open and showing and being more transparent about what is, how a product is made and, those processes behind it. So yeah, I say explore everything that you're interested in. Design thinking is your friend, and going through those processes has really helped me find out exactly where, I want to focus, and has enabled me also to kind of test the waters and see what I'm most interested in and leverage. So
it's really interesting to hear you say how helpful and important design thinking is across a whole range of problems and across a whole range of different opportunities that might present themselves. So we might learn about it in one setting, but actually it's applicable across all kinds of interesting opportunities that you're going to confront. Panel, that's been fantastic, really insightful. The next part of the session is that we're going to open up the conversation to founders that have joined us. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to call up each founder in turn to introduce themselves and then pose a question to you. Okay, I think this is going to work just fine. So first of all, I'm going to call up Abigail. And Abigail, could you unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and then pose your question?
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's been great hearing you all speak. It's been really insightful. As Roni mentioned, I'm Abigail Ajobi, and I started my streetwear label very recently, so October of last year. We just showed with London Fashion Week. I say we, even though I'm the only member of my team. And my question for you is, during the time of the pandemic especially, what do you think is the best way for small brands like mine to gain the attention of press and trust of buyers?
Now, Abigail, who would you like to give a first go at that?
I was gonna say either Comet or Katie. So either that want to go first.
Comet, let's go, and then get some comments from Katie.
Do you know what? I think we've all touched on it already, but essentially I think what people want to see is authenticity. And it's this interesting sort of like tension between things looking slick, but then people seeing like the underside and sort of the process as well. So I'd say, and also that's one of the things I should have been more aware of when I started. Is like everyone wants to know about who you are. So the brand is important, but actually it hinges on you. So I say make sure you get your story, like you personally, your story out there. Like you're obviously like enigmatic and chatty and out there. So I think it's really important that you maximize that and like play off of that as much as you possibly can. Stay authentic. Make sure your brand presents as authentically as it can, and try and get this tension between swinging from like looking super slick and on point to also being like, well, here's a backstory and here's explanation towards it. I think these kind of elements will, in this particular environment, help you sort of stay in the press and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Hi, Abby. Nice wallpaper, by the way. Like, whoa, I've got background jealousy. So when you were showing, were you showing as part of the BFC? Are you on their platform? Are you doing anything with them?
Yeah, so I'm on the London Fashion Week website.
Yeah.
As a designer. I'm not actually on the schedule yet. I only started 4 months ago, so I understand. But I'm on the website. Yeah.
I think it's really worth actually really maximizing being on so you're on the Jaw platform as well, where buyers can get access to you. So you're already doing some really good stuff in terms of kind of being part of that network. I think the beauty of it at the moment is actually obviously you can generate quite a lot of excitement via what you're doing on Instagram, while you're doing stuff on Instagram Live. I think, think about definitely, I know for some people that isn't really what people want to hear, because actually some people are much more back of house in truth. I think if you are someone that's much more back of house, it's all, it's fine to stay kind of enigmatic if you don't want to do that kind of thing. You obviously, as Comet says, you're very personable, you're obviously very charismatic. Feel free, maybe it's something where it's like the night before or just after the show that you would hook up with someone. It could even be a journalist. Like it could only be, I do a bit of mentoring with the BFC actually. It could even be that like we would do a live in conversation where you talk about what you've just done, or you talk about the night before, and you kind of reveal some of those things where you might talk about the inspiration, why you did it in the way that you wanted to do. I think, creating, and I know it's difficult because as a designer, you don't necessarily have time to kind of think about all the content you're producing, but there will be a certain amount of content that you already kind of have to hand by virtue of the inspiration, the mood boards, the things that you are looking at, that part of what you do. It's definitely worth thinking about potentially working with someone that kind of has a content brain to, and that could be a kind of content mentor, as it were, to work with you to think, what do I do with all this stuff? I've got all these mood boards, I have all these ideas. Maybe you had videos that you made when you were casting for your show or your collection. All these little bits where someone can kind of say to you, what else do you have in your arsenal that you can use on different kind of social platforms to promote who you are and what you do in the way that you want to, so that you keep some stuff private, you keep some stuff out there. I think that's really exciting. I mean, when I'm already, you're talking about your collection, I'm like, right, okay, I need to go and see this collection afterwards. So obviously I will want to see it on the BFC site. And I'm interested, I'm thinking, I wonder if she produced a show. I wonder, was it a show, or was it a film she created, or was it what does her own website look like? So there are all these things to do with. I mean, I'm kind of obsessed obviously with the editorial aspect of this. But I think if that helps, thinking about, and you can definitely speak to the BFC actually about mentors, because I think, you know, sometimes people think mentors are people almost like having a personal trainer that's going to tell you what to do, and it's a headache, like who needs another kind of boss in their life. But actually maybe someone that can kind of just work with you and just be a sounding board to when you come to particular key moments. Because I think that's the thing that I felt a little bit like the fashion weeks. I used to get so excited about the fashion weeks, and I still do, but I'm kind of like, because it's so new the way that they're operating at the moment, I'm really interested to see what's going to come out in terms of the content and around people's shows that communicate who they are. So I feel like as we go on the next few seasons, that's going to become much more concentrated, and there's going to be a much bigger opportunity to express yourself and kind of build a brand in that way. I'm always a bit hesitant of saying build a brand because it sounds a bit kind of Kate Craig David and a bit kind of sterile. But I think, you know, ultimately there is that sense of which bits you reveal and which bits you don't, and what stuff you've actually got there that could lend itself to being amazing content to express yourself and promote yourself. But yeah, so definitely speak to the BFC about that. I think they definitely have people that could work with you on it.
Great, thank you. Kayla, would you like to join us? And you've got a question for Irene. So Kayla, introduce yourself and your company and pose your question.
Hi everyone, I'm Kay. First, thank you guys all so much. It's been so great to listen to you. I've recently taken my MA research project and kind of transitioned it into a social enterprise. It's called Fiber Lab Collective, and it's based on fibershed methodology, so building regenerative fashion systems within a hyper-localized setting, specifically within urban contexts. So I've been trying to manage textile material innovation and also consulting. So this question is kind of directed towards Irene. How do you see these two fields of material innovation and consulting kind of coming together and benefiting each other? And also, how did you get involved with working with such internationally esteemed brands?
Yeah, so great question. And yes, I love what you're working on. We need more of that, definitely. And, you know, both of them go really hand in hand, because a lot of the brands too right now need a lot of consulting on these topics. So whether it be around, you know, the circular economy, going back to the basics of sustainability and the triple bottom line, and, you know, bringing in the material innovation that you're working on, of course, is, you know, a great, you know, pilot or a case study that they could be working on. So you can really, you know, bring those hand in hand. A lot of the times brands come to me and they want to have a better understanding, and across, you know, many different departments, what is sustainability and what is the circular economy, or how do you implement this into a company? So I think really leveraging, you know, everything that you studied on that, on material science, and, you know, how you've got to where you are, you might be surprised at where brands are at today. Like, they do put out these very polished sustainability reports, and they have their sustainability team, but of course there's still a lot of gaps within education and understanding across every single department. And from my perspective, and I'm sure you feel this as well, that in order for sustainability to really get moving, it needs to touch every single department. It shouldn't just be siloed out into a sustainability team, but really think about how, you know, you can apply what you've learned, what your expertise, and then how can you take that, you know, and really help brands in every single department utilize those skill sets within their own department. So yeah, I worked with a lot of companies on this, and then also at Swarovski as well. And it really helped for every single, you know, person within each department to have, you know, these key kind of players to really push sustainability forward. So I think that's how you can kind of marry the two, you know, take what you know, your knowledge on, you know, educating companies, and then utilizing also your material innovation as a tool set to say, hey, this is an example of what you could implement, and this is something that we can pilot together. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. And then the second part of my question, sorry if I kind of went through that.
No, it's okay.
was just like, how did you get involved with working with such internationally esteemed businesses, like the big international brands that like consulting with them?
Yeah, so I mean, how I started to, I mean, previously before coming to London, I was working with brands in Los Angeles, and then I really wanted to get experience with working with luxury brands, and that's why, you know, my main goal to go, you know, study at the London College of Fashion and really utilize the networks there. And yeah, that was one of my main goals, is to really expand my network. So I would say definitely utilize this time. I applied for the Caring Award because, you know, of course, with my background in sustainability and, you know, a concept that I had for, you know, mushroom leather. But at the same time, I was like, how can I leverage this as a you know, tool to make really deeper connections? And so that's kind of, you know, was my strategy. And I think that your time right now, a lot of the brands are really open to, you know, having support from students and getting their insights. And so that's, yeah, the direction that I took was how could I leverage my time to really make those connections and create deeper connections as well. So, and then also thinking about, you know, something that also really helped me was looking at where are their gaps. So for instance, I was looking at the sustainability report of Caring, looking at their also their yearly report, financial report, to see, because they also put their sustainability information in there, to see really where those gaps within where their impacts are, and, you know, how could I help them? So I think it's really important too, if to make deeper connections, find out where they're already having these issues before you even are talking to them. That was really helpful, because they said, oh, wow, you know, this person really, you know, kind of understands our brand, looked at our reports that we're putting out there, and did some research on us and coming to us with already some solutions based off of, you know, things that we didn't even communicate yet to her. So I think that is also a great strategy as well.
Thank you so much. Can we speak to Yunjia? Would you like to join us and again introduce yourself and ask your question to the panel, maybe to Alfreda?
Yes, and just briefly introduce myself. My name is Sing, and I'm the founder of XI, Extended Identity. We are building a service like helping physical and young designers, fashion designers, building their digital fashion and digital fashion showroom. My service base just started up right now, and I'm also studying my fashion design management in LCF right now. And my question is like right now in the massive market, the digital fashion is only well accepted by the young people, Generation Z and Y, and Y is it's pretty slow. Like massive market brand or fashion brand, or maybe the Mr. Alfred's brand, it's pretty hard or it's slow to adopt the digital fashion right now.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, Shane. I think the opportunity now that we have, and what the pandemic showed us is that small brands, medium brands, and traditional brands, they're all in the same level now. We only have the digital universe to play. We don't have fashion shows anymore. We don't have like showrooms anymore. It's all virtual and all digital. So that, of course, there's a budget difference between huge brands and tiny brands, but the opportunities that the digital universe gives us are huge. And that's when just doing a parallel with Abby was asking as well. I wouldn't focus too much on the traditional model anymore. I wouldn't focus too much on like traditional press, traditional buyers anymore. I think what we should be looking and now is engaging with our own communities, engaging with our own customers. And I think for your business model, Shane, it's very interesting as well to bring the customers, the final customers, to the virtual showroom, to the virtual universe, and interact with them on that side as well. And yeah, and trying not to compete on the same level, of course, because of the budgets and all the resources traditional brands and huge brands have, big conglomerates have, are completely different. But at the same time, we have, and I can say for Away Tomorrows and we are a very small business. The opportunities that we had on engaging with our direct consumer and our final customer were very, very, very good at this stage, and creating all this digital universe and interacting them on digitally. So
yes, it's like our aim or in the future, we want to build a digital supply chain. It's kind of like building a digital fashion first to test the customer taste, and then go into the massive market production. So that will really, really help for the small brand and young designer brand and really achieve sustainability. Yeah. So I really like your answer, but will you think this kind of digital first supply chain is possible, or will take a long years to achieve?
I think it's possible. I think I'm 100% with you. I think this is the future, and it should be the future of the industry. What we need to work now, and I think that's why we're struggling at the moment, and I think everyone in the industry struggles, is in the manufacturing process. It's still very slow and still very manual. It's very human dependent. So I think, and we worked out on the creative side, so we can do all the creative bits, patterns, sampling, all digital. But now we still need a sewing machine and 2 pairs of hands to put the dress together. So when we do the supply chain, there's 100% digital. Then it's amazing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Apple. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And Zoad, can you join us now, please? And again, introduce yourself and your company, and pitch your question at one of the panel.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Zoad. I'm a casting director, and I'm co-founder of Tide Casting. I run it alongside my business partner Roni, and we studied at LCF. And we decided to start a business while we were there. We originally went into casting and then decided to also start managing our own faces. And we want to be trying out different things. So we started casting then faces, and now we want to go into production. And so my question is, how did you find teaching yourself about an area of the industry you didn't have previous experience in?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, basically, I from my own experience, I became obsessed with different aspects of, different fields of innovation that I was looking into, and, to self-educate. I think it's best to talk to, professionals that are in the field, gather those kind of mentors, and look at who's doing it really, really well at the moment. So if you're looking at sustainability, or if you're looking at new ways in which you can integrate digital supply chains, looking at those companies who are kind of pushing the boundaries in that. So you can self-educate that way. Of course, being a part of the university and looking at different reports or case studies of what's out there, that's also really important. But yeah, my tactic was just get your hands dirty, and really look into different areas in which you can start testing things out and trying things out, and then of course doing your research behind that as well to prepare you to really understand the processes and how things are done. But looking back at different industry reports or looking at different research, doing your research is really important, but also doing looking at the design thinking process. It's also about those case studies, looking at who's your main user, and looking at those things. What are the challenges that they're having, and then bringing out exactly what you're trying to achieve. So I think it's a lot of many moving parts to really understand a new area that you're most interested in, to get the result or the what you're trying to achieve.
So could I just ask, when you said you were moving into production, so you were in casting, so you mean shoot production and things like that, or?
Yeah, so we've done it a few times where we've been asked to, for example, we've been asked to cast our own models for something, and then they decided that they wanted to get us to produce a whole campaign for a brand.
Right.
So we've done it a couple of times, but
yeah,
we wanted to start doing that a lot more, and just, I don't know, we're trying to figure out how to actually go about doing that and getting clients for it. And
yeah, I mean, funnily enough, because I actually used to be the bookings and production editor for Harper's Bazaar. So I used to I used to do all the casting and all the production at Harper's Bazaar. This was about 10 years ago. And I would say what's interesting is actually, this kind of dovetails with what Irene was saying. In terms of establishing yourself as a production agency, look at what other businesses aren't doing. So for instance, quite a good company to look at, there's a company called Thursday's Child. And they caught my eye because what they were looking at, because of course you've got in the production world, you have really big established agencies. So you'll have people like Streeters or CLM, or these people that have like these stables where basically they will generally try to keep everything within their stable. So they'll want to use the same photographer, they'll want to use the same hair and makeup, and you almost have to do deals. That's the weird thing, fashion is so hierarchical like that it was like, the same thing with casting. Actually, it's like I would only be able to get a really big model for Harper's Bazaar if I would always use a sort of a new face for a particular shoot I was doing. Now, the thing that was interesting, and this is why I say this goes back to what Irene was saying about thinking, think about what isn't there in the industry that would set you apart. And I mention this because Thursday's Child, what was interesting is that they were specifically helping brands work with local and quite often kind of people that were like emerging talents in particular areas. And that was really useful because you would have big brands, for instance, like a Nike, would want to do something really creative, but actually, and it wasn't necessarily about budget. It was about saying at that point, this was a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they wanted to say, we don't necessarily want to use the same photographer that's A, megabucks, and B, everybody is using that photographer because it makes the campaign look quite these campaigns look quite samey. And they were kind of saying, we want a production company that can help us get into local talent. So if we're wanting to shoot a campaign about Miami, for instance, who are the young up and coming photographers that we should be working with there? How do we cast? What are the production issues? So I think there is a real, and I've done a lot of work on community and local centricity and things like that in the last 6 months at Stylus. I think there's a massive opportunity there to be perhaps the company, and especially since you're, relatively new in terms of graduating from LCF, there would probably be, people would be really interested in the fact that maybe they would feel like you're a little bit more in touch with people that are emerging talent. There's a sort of smaller groups of people, collectives that aren't as well known yet. I think there's a lot of mileage in that. So that would be one suggestion, to sort of A, look at those types of companies, and B, think about pitching yourself in that kind of way where actually you're looking at production from a perspective, because production of course is all about those moving parts, the location, the set design, the hair and makeup, the whatever else is coming in. So yeah, I would think about that. Think about what those big agencies, it's a little bit like advertising agencies, big advertising agencies really falling foul now with brands that actually don't want these kind of big, cumbersome, expensive, not necessarily totally in touch companies. And so you might have a really nice niche to get into there perhaps.
Great.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting actually. That's definitely a good way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Now, the very end part, we hand over to Francis and to see if there are any wider questions to pose. I think we've probably only got time for 1 or 2 killer questions. Francis.
Yeah, no, fine. Thank you, Roni, and thank you, panel. Really insightful. So we have a question from Tessa Ling Wang, and this is for Comey. Comey, how do you balance the creative side of your business with the strategic and management side of things?
I have an operations director. So so actually initially before I had that, I would go back to mentors. That is still a key part of doing things I don't know how to do that I need to do. So I would say definitely have a range of mentors, and I think just be really aware of what you can't do well. rather than spending lots of time trying to learn how to do something you can't do well, you don't enjoy doing, just like scrap that, find a mentor, get the gold, and try and incorporate that into your business model. And then when you can, just get people to do things you really hate doing. Is that useful?
Lovely. Thank you. Back to you, Roni. Thank you.
Thank you. Gosh, we have to conclude this session, and it's been such a joy. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you for giving up your time. You know, you're sharing your expertise with a whole new generation of young people coming through who are facing a great deal of uncertainty. And I think all of the things that you've said today will give courage to young people as they find their way. So a massive thank you from me and from the London College of Fashion for your time this afternoon. And for students that be listening to this, do remember that we've got the Graduate Futures Founders Club for those that are really looking into setting up their own business, which is full of resources and advice and other touch points back with LCF on this really important topic. So with that, we come to an end, and apparently the screen just goes blank, and we just say goodbye to each other. So we'll just do a bit of waving, and then and goodbye, and then it'll all go very quiet. Thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. See you.